about Gaia. Now, when you read Vita Sapien philosophy, you'll come across the word Gaia, and you'll see it spelled in two different ways, G-A-I-A, and you'll also see the spelling G-Y-A. Let me explain the difference to you. Broadly speaking, the same thing, but some subtle differences that are very important. So firstly, let's talk about Gaia, G-A-I-A. Now, the word Gaia relates to a scientific theory that was originally introduced to the world through the title the Gaia hypothesis. Hypothesis like a lesser level of science than a theory. And the paper that came out was called Atmospheric Homeostasis by and for the Biosphere, the Gaia Hypothesis. And it was authored by James Lovelock and Mark Eulis. This was about, I think, 1974. And this was a paper that was basically saying that there is evidence that living things have prospered on planet Earth over the last 3 or so billion years because living things on Earth behave in a manner to actually regulate the chemistry of the atmosphere and the ocean to maintain conditions suited to life on Earth. That the living planet, that is to say all the living things on the planet or the biosphere, has an inbuilt control mechanism to actually maintain conditions suited to its own well-being. So Gaia, G-A-I-A, the actual name Gaia is a derivation of G-A-E-A, which is the ancient Greek goddess of the earth. Okay, so ancient Greek goddess of the earth, that name is taken to use to describe the scientific theory that says life on Earth behaves in the manner of a single living organism. Gaia, G-Y-A, is a word that Vita Sapien uses to describe broadly the same thing, but the distinction is that Gaia is a spiritual belief as opposed to a scientific theory. G-Y-A, Gaia, is a spiritual belief that life on Earth is a single living organism, rather than a scientific theory that life on Earth behaves in the manner of a single living organism. Gaia, G-Y-A, is a spiritual belief that life on Earth is a single living organism. Now, as I say, it's a spiritual belief. It's optional. You don't have to believe it. But having said that, one of the principles of Vita Sapien philosophy is that our beliefs should, as closely as possible, match science and reality, right? That way you stay grounded in what you believe. And there is actually only a small sort of distinction between behaving in the manner of and actually being, and we sort of take that step into the realm of the spiritual belief. Let's investigate for a moment what we might actually ascribe a name. What name might we give to the living planet if it were actually a single living organism? So we call it Gaia to keep it very simple. But if we were to actually apply a methodology referred to as taxonomic classification to the living planet being a single organism, then there's a thought experiment that was gone through some years ago that came up with the name Imperium vitae-planeta. Now, Imperium vitae-planeta is a binomial. It's a two-part name in Latin that is broadly descriptive of the organism. And in this case, Imperium vitae-planeta roughly translates to the empire of the living planet. So you'll find in Vita Sapien philosophy that we refer to Gaia, Imperium vitae-planeta, or just simply vitae-planeta. We also refer to the living planet and the biosphere. So all of these things are broadly the same concept, but it's slightly different. Back to Gaia, G-Y-A for a moment, and let's think what that actually means. If indeed all life on Earth is in fact a single living organism and we ourselves in the body, that might seem like a really peculiar concept. But let me share with you the idea of a holobiont. A holobiont is a scientific name that describes a living organism that is actually comprised of many, many, many other living organisms. Like, for example, a human being and all mammals, in fact, I'd say most all vertebrates, are holobionts, which is to say that you have the host organism, the human being, but the host organism is actually the host to trillions upon trillions upon trillions of cells that are not human. Okay, so within our digestive tract, all across our skin and other parts of our body, we have the microflora. These are fungi and bacteria and viruses and protists and a whole range of other living beings that actually inhabit us, and that if we took those away, the human being would actually just die very quickly, because all of these other little critters are actually performing functions, and the main one being aiding in the digestion in the small intestines. Okay, so straight away the idea that there can be a living being made up of multiple living beings is not so strange. I'll direct you also your attention to the lichen. Lichen you see these green and multicolored things growing on rocks and on rotten vegetation. And a lichen is basically a symbiotic relationship between algae and fungi. And so these two individual types of organisms come together and form a symbiotic relationship, a symbiotic unit that is able to do things that each of those things on its own couldn't do. Think also of something like a coral reef. You have the skeleton of the reef, the calcium carbonate that is formed by the coral polyps, of which there are many, many, many millions. And then there's thousands of types of fish and crustaceans and mollusks and all of these other critters that all help to maintain the integrity of that ecological system called the coral reef. You could regard the coral reef as a single living organism, in a sense. So the idea of Gaia, that all life on Earth plus the ocean, atmosphere, and soils combined forms a single living being, is a very powerful spiritual idea, because what it does, if you hold that view, if you hold that belief, it has us humans have to accept that we are part of that living body, and that we have an innate responsibility to the host, a responsibility of care to the host, because the host is effectively our life support system. And so people that believe that all life on Earth is part of a single living being, and that we humans are part of cells in the greater body, typically have a much greater sense of awe and respect. Now, the other aspect of Gaia is, if we were to see the living planet as a single living organism, then we get a real sense that she could die. All right. Now, the idea of Gaia dying has some complexities. So if we were to consider, for example, that Gaia has organs, okay? For example, the phytoplankton, the tiny little algae and other critters that float around in the ocean that photosynthesize, form the lower rung of the marine food chain, provide all manner of functions to the biosphere in the release of the DMS gas, dimethyl sulfide, that helps to seed clouds. The clouds shape the ocean, which helps to keep the ocean cool within the temperatures that are suited for an abundance of life. The phytoplankton also sequester carbon dioxide from the water, which is drawn down from the air, and the carbon in that carbon dioxide can sink to the seafloor as the phytoplankton die, and basically effectively forming what's called a carbon pump, moving carbon from the atmosphere out of the atmosphere system, and therefore helping to regulate climate. The phytoplankton, in helping to form clouds, also help to bring rain inland to put water in the forests. The water comes down, liberating minerals into the ocean, and a great biological circle life, okay? So if you were to see the plankton as organs within Gaia's body, you start to realize that if we hammer away at the plankton by increasing the sea temperature because of climate change, because of marine pollution, because of a whole bunch of other things that we can do to mess up the plankton in the ocean, you can see that we're actually harming the organs of Gaia. Another organ of Gaia is the vast areas of forest. Now, there's a principle called the biotic pump, which basically says that these forests are actually a type of air conditioning system for the planet, and that they help to actually eject heat out of the atmosphere. Okay, so if we hammer the forests, we're hammering away at another one of Gaia's organs. And you can imagine if the organs are under pressure like this and the organs fail, then the integrity of the system, the oneness, the organism, right, starts to become ill and then potentially could die. Now, for Gaia to die, like there's 12,000 nuclear weapons on planet Earth. If we were to have a big general exchange and use them all, there's a good chance that we would smash the ecosystem to such an extent that it lost its self-regulating capability. And the self-regulating capability is what has allowed the biosphere to survive over these last 3.8 billion years. Now, you could argue that Gaia didn't really emerge until about maybe 600 million years ago. That's one of the arguments that we sort of advance, that you need a sufficient amount of biomass on the planet, biomass diversity, in order to actually have that maintaining that self-correcting system. So it's conceivable that we could damage Earth to such a point that the planet loses the ability to maintain or to control temperatures suited to life. But what we've seen from mass extinction events, or the evidence of them, is that even after a severe pounding, right, life on Earth finds a way to re-establish its balance and come back to full health. So our feeling is that we humans may not be long for Earth if we continue on our unsustainable path, and we are most certainly harming Gaia now and will continue to do so for the foreseeable future until we transition. But the ultimate long-term prognosis is for Gaia is that she will eventually come back to full health. And there's a good chance that she'll be in full health for maybe as much as 1 billion years, beyond which time the sun will age as it chews through its hydrogen fuel. The planet will get too hot, and eventually it will just simply be too hot for Gaia to survive, and then eventually biofinalis, which would be the last gasp of organism that perishes on this overheated planet. So the opportunity that is before us, if we fall in love with Gaia, like the way that a scuba diver ought to fall in love with his scuba diving gear because it's his life support system, if none other reason, then it's possible we can bring Gaia back to full health, okay? And I'm talking about just ensuring that there's vast tracts of the healthy ocean, vast tracts of healthy forest, lakes and wetlands are restored to health, and we can have all manner of extraordinary human lifestyles and economies taking place around these things. Then it's possible that we can live with an abundant ecosystem for hundreds of millions of years into the future. The aspiration for Vita Sapien is that we humans thrive in synergy with Gaia for a galactic year. And a galactic year is 230 million Earth years.